The effects of occupational noise exposure. Do you know that every year approximately 30 million people in the U.S. are occupationally exposed to hazardous noise? Thousands of workers every year suffer from preventable hearing loss due to high workplace noise levels. Since 2004, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has reported that nearly 125,000 workers have suffered significant permanent hearing loss. In 2009 alone, BLS has reported more than 21,000 cases of hearing loss. My goal today is to inform you on how to protect your hearing in the workplace. I am credible to speak on this subject as I have done research and is one of my responsibilities as a safety professional. My goal is to train employees in the workplace on exposure and occupational noise hazards. One of the things we'll cover today is how the ear works. When sound waves enter the ear, the vibrations impact the eardrum and are transmitted to the middle and inner ear. In the middle ear, three small bones called the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup amplify and transmit the vibrations generated to the inner ear. The inner ear contains a snail-like structure called the cochlea, which is filled with fluid and lined with cells with very fine hairs. These microscopic hairs move with vibrations and convert the sound waves into nerve impulses, which result in the sound we hear. Exposure to loud noise can destroy these hair cells and cause permanent hearing loss. So now that we talked about how the ear works, we will talk about what are the warning signs in the workplace which may be too noisy. Noise may be a problem in your workplace if you hear ringing or humming in your ears when you leave work. You have to shout to be heard by a coworker that is an arm length away. You experience temporary hearing loss when leaving work. So how loud is too loud? Noise is measured in units of sound pressure levels called decibels, which is named after Alexander Graham Bell, using A-weighted sound levels known as decibels. The A-weighted sound levels closely match the perception of loudness by the human ear. Decibels are measured on a logarithmic scale, which means that a small change in the number of decibels results in a huge change in the amount of noise and the potential damage to a person's hearing. OSHA has set legal limits on noise in the workplace. These limits are based on a worker's time-weighted average over an 8-hour workday. With noise, OSHA's permissible exposure limit is 90 decibels for all workers in an 8-hour day. The OSHA standard uses a 5 decibel exchange rate. This means that when the noise level is increased by 5 decibels, the amount of time a person can be exposed to a certain noise level to receive the same dose is cut in half. The National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, otherwise known as NIOSH, has recommended that all worker exposures to noise should be controlled below a level equivalent to 85 decibels for 8 hours to minimize occupational noise-induced hearing loss. NIOSH has found that significant noise-induced hearing loss occurs at the exposure levels equivalent to the OSHA PEL based on updated information obtained by literature reviews. NIOSH also recommends a 3 decibel exchange rate, so that every increase by 3 decibels doubles the amount of noise and has the recommended amount of exposure time. In 1981, OSHA implemented new requirements to protect all workers in the general industry. For employers to implement a hearing conservation programs where workers are exposed to a time-weighted average of 85 decibels or more on an 8-hour work shift. Hearing conservation programs require employers to measure noise levels, provide free annual hearing exams, and free hearing protection, along with providing training and conducting evaluations of the adequacy of the hearing protectors in use unless changes to tools, equipment, and schedules are made so that they are less noisy and the worker exposure to noise is less than 85 decibels. So what can be done to reduce the noise hazard? Noise controls are the first line of defense against excessive noise exposure. The use of these controls should aim to reduce the hazard exposure to the point where the risk to hearing is eliminated or minimized. With the reduction of even a few decibels, the hazard to hearing is reduced, communication is improved, and noise-related annoyance is reduced. There are several ways to control and reduce worker exposure to noise in a workplace. One is through engineering controls that would reduce sound exposure levels, are available and technologically feasible for most noise sources. Engineering controls involve modifying or replacing equipment, making related physical changes at the noise source or along the transmission path to reduce the noise level at the worker's ear. In some instances, the application of a relatively simple engineering noise control solution reduces the noise hazard to the extent that further requirements of the OSHA noise standards are not necessary. Some examples of inexpensive engineering controls include: choose low noise tools and machinery, place a barrier between the noise source and the worker, such as sound walls or curtains, or enclose or isolate the noise source. Second would be through administrative controls, which are changes in the workplace that reduce or eliminate the worker exposures to noise. Some examples of these would be operating noisy machines during shifts when fewer people are exposed, limiting the amount of time a person spends at a noise source, and then restricting workers' presence to a suitable distance away from noisy equipment. Another one would be through hearing protection devices, such as earmuffs, plugs, are considered an acceptable but less desirable option to control exposure to noise and are generally used during the time necessary to implement engineering or administrative controls. When such controls are not feasible or when workers' hearing tests indicate significant hearing damage. And then the last is implement an effective hearing conservation program, which is required by employers in general industry whenever work noise exposure is equal to or greater than 85 decibels for an 8-hour exposure. This program strives to prevent initial occupational hearing loss, preserve and protect remaining hearing, and equip workers with the knowledge and hearing protection devices necessary to protect them. So some of the key elements of a hearing conservation program would be workplace noise sampling, which would include personal noise monitoring, informing your workers of the results of their noise monitoring, provide affected workers with an opportunity to observe any noise measurements, maintaining a worker audiometric testing, which is required annually, implementing comprehensive hearing protection follow-up procedures for workers who show a loss of hearing after completing baseline and yearly audiometric testing, by providing proper selection of hearing protection, and then evaluate the hearing protectors and attenuation and effectiveness for specific workplace noise, training and information that ensures the workers are aware of the hazards from excessive noise exposures and how to properly use the protective equipment that can be provided. And lastly, provide the workers access to records regarding monitoring and noise sampling. Now I have a list of some visual aids that I would like to share with you. This, as we talked about, is the noise levels, the least severe being 60 decibels to the most severe, which is 150 decibels. And as you can see, normal speech ranges about 60 decibels, and it goes all the way up to 150 decibels. So we have normal speech at 60, and then we've all been at airports where we see the workers on the at the airport, air traffic controllers where jets take off is they're exposed to 150 decibel. And generally, most of these workers have dual hearing protection on, which is they have hearing earplugs and then ear muffs. Now the second slide that I have to share with you is how we measure sound. We measure sound with an audio decimeter and then sound level meter. So an audio decimeter is, I would hook this up to a worker through their entire shift. You would hook this onto their belt loop, and then you would put the microphone up, and you always want to place the microphone to the worker's ear. So this simulates what the worker is hearing throughout their shift. Sound level meter, how I use a sound level meter is if we have a new process going in our area. Once the equipment is in, I would have the engineers turn the equipment on, and then I would do sound level readings to make sure that we are either out of the hearing conservation, or if we were in, then it would mean that our workers in that area would have to be in the hearing conservation program. And then the last slide that I would like to share with you is just an example of different types of hearing protection. You have your earmuffs, and then you also have your hearing protection, which is, there are two kinds. You have disposable and then reusable. Disposable would be that it's a one-time use, and then reusable is they would be molded to the employee's ears, and that would be specifically theirs, and then each day they would be responsible for cleaning. So, so these are just some examples and visual aids that I wanted to share with you. So what I've done is today I've informed you on how the ear works. Warning signs on your workplace might be too noisy. How loud is too loud, and then what can be done to reduce the hazards of noise in your workplace. So by informing you of the guidelines I shared with you, hopefully this will keep you aware of the signs of occupational noise hazards and being one of the statistics of losing your hearing associated with occupational noise in the workplace. Remember, you have the right to a safe workplace. The law requires employers to provide their employees with working conditions that are free of known hazards. Thank you.